All right, welcome everybody. We're so happy that we've made it this far today. It's been pretty exciting. And we have a wonderful group this afternoon. And I'm going to start right out and introduce Celeste Flores. And now I want to find her place here. And I will bring her up here with me. Celeste is a child of immigrant parents and serves as the director of community building at Mano a Mano Family Resource Center that's in Lake County, Illinois. She is responsible for developing and implementing civic engagement, immigrant community organizing, and policy advocacy. She also oversees the Democracy in Action program and the Liderazgo program for emerging leaders in Lake County. Celeste has also worked in the national environmental justice movement for the past 9 years. Her work with frontline community members has drawn national attention to the environmental injustices associated with corporate polluters in the Lake County, Illinois area. As the former co-chair of Clean Power Lake County, she has built pivotal relationships with coalition partners and officials around the country and champions for environmental justice and frontline communities to be part of conversations shaping policy decisions. She has been awarded numerous recognitions for her state and federal legislative work. Celeste received the 2017 Archdiocese of Chicago Hispanic Ministry Gaudium et Spes Award. She was a recipient of the 2020 Energy News Network 40 Under 40 Award, and Celeste was the 2020 guest of Senator Tammy Duckworth for the State of the Union. Celeste recognizes that political engagement is critical at every level of government. In 2022, she was appointed to the Warren Newport Library Board. Celeste was named to the 2022 class of the Edgar Fellows Program. And most recently, she was chosen to be part of the 2023 Illinois Institute for Leadership Training Academy class. So Celeste, we're so happy to have you. And she's the first one who's going to start us off with what does it really take to get a bill through the state of Illinois? Celeste.
Hey, y'all. I'm going to start sharing my screen, but just want to thank you again for having me on. Let's see if this works here. So thank you so much, Rosemary, for that introduction. Like I said, my name is Celeste Flores, and I was tasked with talking about empowering voters and how to get a grassroots bill passed. And I've been doing this work here in Lake County. I was born and raised. And through the work, I was also part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition that was pivotal in passing the most major environmental legislation. I was elected to be on their steering committee. I was also elected to be the co-leader of the Grassroots committee and on the negotiation team. And really, I had no idea the work that Clean Power Lake County and the journey that it was going to take me in. I've been with this group since 2014 when I moved back to Lake County after receiving my undergrad degree. I was born and raised in Lake County and saw the devastation of mountaintop removal and coal extraction in Eastern Kentucky. And when I moved back, I've always cared about the environment. I thought that I would just, do some recycling, some composting. And I learned that there was a coal plant in my community. And the reason I didn't know there was a coal plant was because I grew up in Park City, Illinois, which is situated between Waukegan and Gurnee. And in order to access the beach in Waukegan, you need to have a city sticker or pay. If you just drive a couple more minutes west or north, you get to the state beach. And that's the beach that I grew up going to. Unbeknownst to me, right, that there's nuclear there as well. That's a story for another day. And Doug Ower is our expert on nuclear there. So, Clean Power Lake County started off in 2013 as a coalition. And it was originally a Sierra Club Beyond Coal campaign, which just meant that we had resources and finance from Sierra Club. And what we had is that we had an organizer come and speak to community members, and people realized that they wanted to know when this coal plant was going to be retired. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. And we started working together, and I joined them in 2014, and we quickly had to become experts on not only how an operation of the coal plants, but on what coal ashes, which is a byproduct of burning coal. We learned that there were Superfund sites in Waukegan, ethylene oxide, and so much more. We had to learn the process of local ordinances and state legislation, and we had to learn how to take legal action to assure that our community was ready for the inevitable. We knew the retirement was going to happen, and we didn't want it to happen like we've seen it across the country, like we had seen in Chicago. So throughout all these years, our latest version, I think we updated our mission statement in 2021, is to ensure clean air, clean water, and a healthy soil for every Lake County community member, and to achieve the self-determination of those disproportionately impacted by the environment. And, you know, I've already spoken a little bit about our why, but this is a picture of us in Waukegan, because we believe that our lakefront should have no toxic sites. You know, a community where polluting industry doesn't pin economic growth and jobs with clean air, clean water, and healthy soils. This was the first event that I attended as a community member for Clean Power Lake County. And it was something that I knew I had to be a part of. You know, learning that 1 in 3 children in Waukegan have asthma or asthma-like symptoms. I knew I had to be involved, and wasn't sure what that meant. At that time, I was still looking for employment, and well, I was working at the church, but you know, ministry work is a lot, and I would say that environmental work was a lot too. But it was, you know, seeing that coal plant and knowing everything else that was around there really helped push us, especially in 2017, when the group decided to stop taking funding to continue doing this work. We started off trying to get the local mayor to help us with the company that's called NRG Energy that owns the coal plant, to sit down with us and talk about a retirement. And we got involved with the local mayoral elections. We got aldermen voted in. We spoke with them. We were at council meetings. You know, I saw people go from not being willing to speak in public to making remarks at council meetings, to showing up to community events. And throughout all of that, I grew as an individual. I had no idea what organizing was in the traditional sense. I think I learned as I was doing it that I had seen a lot of this in my home church growing up with my parents, and how they organized the church within to do things. And this is why we decided, going from a state, going from the local ordinance to state work. And I will share some spoilers before I talk about how the wins happened, because it has not been easy. You know, everyday people coming together can make a difference. And I've seen that being part of CPLC. We've been part of major legislation, and it didn't happen overnight. We had to educate and mobilize community through community meetings, house parties, and many individual conversations that we call one-on-ones in the organizing world. And we realized we had to build relationships with our elected officials to serve our interests. We went from having Lake County legislators telling us in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016 that NRG was a good neighbor and that they were going to always do the right thing for us, that there was no need to be concerned about holding them accountable, to having these same legislators now being the ones that are holding them accountable and passing the most equitable environmental bill that we could in 2021. we had to learn, at least I think, that there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, rather folks that you have shared interests and shared definitions that you're working towards together. We had to learn what folks' self-interest was, and I think self-interest can get a negative notion, but it's not necessary. We need to know what's the driving factor behind people, and we want to know how we can use that to work with them or educate them in what they need. And we needed to be strategical about how we were mobilizing people, what we asked them to do, because the majority of Waukegan is low income, working class community members. Folks can't always afford to take a whole day to travel to Springfield. So as CPLC leadership, we had to be intentional about where we asked people to spend their time and their energy. And I mentioned this a little bit, but really it was after the 2016 mayoral election that we decided to refocus from local to state. And we knew that across the state, people were working on this bill called the Future Energy Jobs Act. And we were aware that there was a coalition that was being built because we had people that were part of CPLC that were working in the environmental space and were privy to these conversations and these meetings. And we decided to start looking, how could we join this coalition? Were there other coalitions federally that were doing some of this work? So for this presentation and for what Rosemary has asked me to cover, I will talk about how our efforts and our successes to passing the Coal Ash Pollution Prevention Act in 2019. Every piece of legislation is a little different, and there's similarities as how you get a bill passed, but there could be a lot of inside, outside tactics and strategies that vary between this different legislations. But we've passed, we've been part of coalitions that have passed the Future Energy Jobs Act, the Coal Ash Pollution Prevention Act. We didn't get creative names for the ethylene oxide legislation in 2019, but there were 2 bills there too. And then most recently, the 2021 Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which a lot of people know as CEJA. And this work also couldn't have been done without the coalitions we joined for the Illinois communities for coal ash cleanup. This was what really helped us bring the coal ash bill in. And for us, coalitions, especially since 2017, have been instrumental. We knew we wanted to start focusing on state legislation, and we needed to continue working with organizations we had already met that we knew were working in Springfield and across the state. But especially because we became all volunteers, had no official staff, and at that moment didn't even have a nonprofit status. So we knew we wanted to advocate and educate, but not lobby. And this helped us not rush into having to get C3 status or C4 status for us. So it's really been instrumental for us and allowing us to grow as community members and individuals, but not have to make those decisions of, do we hire staff? What do we do? And then of course, there's the logo of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition as well. And both of these coalitions have helped with research that have become reports that help educate legislators and the public. Both of these coalitions have helped CPLC volunteers with media training, from live interviews to speaking with reporters, and providing any kind of trainings that we need. Things have not always been rosy, and I think there's been a lot of growth in Illinois when it comes to the environmental sector and working together in our shared interest. And from the FIJA to CEJA, we can see that growth of the coalition and being able to get more momentum. And the League of Women Voters, I know, is also part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition and a long-standing member of Clean Power Lake County through our ups and downs of being a coalition to just being volunteers. So there's a lot of other names and other organizations that I'm omitting from this right now because of time. Legislation, when, when a group is thinking about what type of legislation they are looking to implement, that they're trying to change, there's a lot of different ways. With Clean Power Lake County, we've mostly been doing new legislation, but at Mano a Mano Family Resource Center, a lot of my time actually goes into the budget legislation and making sure that the appropriate money is funded for appropriate line items. So, each group kind of has to decide what they need. Is there something that's already in law that they want to amend? Is there some kind of legislation with a sunset that needs to be changed? So every group kind of has to be able to have these conversations and decide internally before, approaching their elected official or anyone else what to do, or maybe you decide together as well. And we knew that we wanted to secure a just transition for the coal plants. And one of those things was that we knew that coal ash had to be a separate item as well. And we wanted it removed from our facilities. That's what we heard time and time again from community members, that it was too close to Lake Michigan. We wanted it removed. And with this coalition, we knew that there was coal ash across Illinois and that we were able to do this with other partners across Illinois. And, when you're looking at legislation, you could have some of the best ideas and solutions for a problem that can be addressed. But if elected officials aren't on board, it can be a really rough road ahead. At the moment in Illinois, we have a super majority Democrats legislator, and our governor is Democrats. And, we were working at a time when we didn't have that, right? So we do now, and it's really great to be able to work in this climate. I think with FIJA, there was a lot of things that we knew we had to negotiate because of who the governor was at the time. And, it's always important to know who your legislators are and everyone else, but even within your legislators, there's also caucuses and leadership. So, it's something to keep in mind when you're looking to gain support for your bill. It's who is part of what caucus and what leadership, and how can your bill become a priority for these caucuses and those in leadership. And also when you're thinking of who your main sponsor for your bill is, what caucuses are they a part of, or do they have any kind of leadership role? And when we were working with everyone across the state for coal ash, we were looking really for a lot of support downstate, and it was decided that the late Senator Bennett and Senator Rep. Ammons would be the main sponsors. There's a coal plant and coal ash in their district as well. And we wanted to work with them, and there was a lot of leadership that they had shown already. And I wasn't as much involved in those conversations. I think just because of when it was and who was actually in Springfield and had relationships. And again, CPLC, we would maybe go down once a year, but didn't have lobbyists or experts. We really relied on our coalition partners and those that had lobbyists to be able to walk us through that, right? So, when you work on draft language and you want to introduce something, I think we have all seen Schoolhouse Rock of how a bill becomes a law, and I'm not gonna play the video for you all, but it's a little different in Illinois, from that cartoon, but a lot of it is the same, right? You have a bill and you're working with a main sponsor to introduce it in either chamber, the Senate or the House, and it goes through these steps of being heard in a committee, for there being votes, and it going on the floor and having to go to both chambers, right, to be able to officially get down to the governors. And this is very much a very high level way of talking about it, because there's a lot that can go into this. I think the pandemic has definitely had some silver linings and one of that is that these committee hearings, people have been able to testify now virtually rather than having to be in Springfield, which was a reason sometimes people from CPLC did not were not there, because a committee hearing may be scheduled for Wednesday, and you know, Elaine can go more in depth, but things happen and it gets moved, right? And you already asked for one day off. Are you gonna stay and spend another night? Is there even a hotel room, right? So these were all things as CPLC that we had to learn and really rely on our coalition partners to help us walk through this. And it really depends on the legislation, on your sponsor, how everything is done, right? Sometimes when you have a big bill or you really need the more general public support, because you know you're going against corporations that have a lot of influence and have a lot more lobbyists than you, you may do a big public media saying you're introducing a bill. And CPLC has been a part of those. And, you know, we work with our elected officials to put this together for the speaker lineup, to get the right folks in the room. And this was what, this is part of the bigger conversation, right, of the group and what is going to be needed. And we knew that with coal ash, we were going to need public support. There was, we were going to need to educate people on this, and doing some kind of press conference made sense for us. And then having to learn, right, the legislative activities. I know that the League of Women Voters is no strangers to witness slips, right? And I don't know, is it, oh, I must have, I will send it to Rosemary, but Leader Barbara Hernandez from the House actually has a really helpful and useful YouTube video and a PDF on witness slips. And it's, you know, great to see an elected official have that on their official page. But a witness slip is, you know, is how people or groups show a position for a particular bill. That is vital for legislation process, because, you know, this is something that's presented in committee, and elected officials like to know, right, where is the public swaying on this. There's also subject matter hearings, which I'll touch more upon, and then testimonies for committee hearings as well. And then the infamous one-pagers for your bill, and not wanting to be more than one page because it won't be read, is what I've been told. And that's what we did with this coal ash bill. In this picture, we have the late Senator Bennett and Dulce Ortiz, who's the co-chair of Clean Power Lake County. She was testifying, right? And there's different ways that you can put something in the official record. You can be there in person and do an oral, or you can send in a written statement. And just wanna, you know, you give a summary of your position, what you're doing there, and who can be a part of this? Really, anyone. It really just depends on, in my opinion, maybe Elaine can talk more about this. It's, you know, the committee chair has a lot of the power when it comes to who is going to be testifying and giving remarks. And it can be both from folks that are proponents, which means that you're in favor of it, those that are opponents that are against the bill, or people that are neutral, or people that we consider just experts on the subject. So you really have to, you know, your bill main sponsor needs to communicate with the committee chair and making sure that what's the lineup, who can speak there. And, you know, this was something that was given to us, you know, about how a testimony should go, the order it should go in. And really, you're relying a lot on your main sponsor, on your coalition partners that are in Springfield to be able to navigate through these systems. Because sometimes there's other political stuff at play that you have no control over as an individual or as a group, but stuff that's going on in Springfield, right? So as we're going through this project, through this process, you know, these are some helpful websites when it comes to IGLA. I'm not saying that right. And, you know, being able to follow and listen to the testimony, to the committee hearings. You can also create an account at the IGLO dashboard for witness slips. And then if you're following everything about the budget, you know, you can follow it there too. And really a lot of this is more done by those that are professionally paid, but you can always, as an individual, keep following a bill and it will show you everything of who the main sponsor is, who the co-sponsor is, and where it is in that process of the page that I showed before. And so a lot of this is inside, right? Like what is happening in Springfield with our legislators on a day-to-day basis. But then we also have all these external events and things that we can be doing. And we did a CPLC with our coalition partners. You know, like I mentioned, we held community meetings and events. We drove down to Springfield. We wrote letters to the editor. We got articles published. On a side note, CPLC does have a documentary that was not done for coal ash, but just for our general campaign. And making this an issue in elections, right? Having people talk about what you want to pass, about the environment, about coal ash, and having people ask those questions, reporter asking those questions. And something that we've been very, very fortunate with is social media, and having a coalition that really has used social media for its benefit as well, right? So a lot of going to Springfield, a lot of filling the buses, and you know, even though we're wearing shirts that talk about Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, everyone that day also was talking about the coal ash bill, right? So being able to be in Springfield and talk about more than one thing, and as you're doing that, working with your legislators to make sure you know what the roll call is, which is just a fancy way of knowing, keeping track of where legislators are at, how they're going to vote. Because at the end of the day, your legislator, your main sponsor, is not going to want to call up a bill if it's going to fail. And sometimes doing a roll call initially does help target, right, who you need to advocate. And a lot of times your sponsor will kind of have an internal sheet where they're keeping track instead of having it be on the floor and on a vote. But, you know, you just got to be persistent and know that you're doing the best that you can to build that pressure externally and internally with your coalition partners, with your main sponsor. And for when it does come down to a vote in either chamber, for it to pass so that the governor can then sign it. And, you know, every bill has to go through this. And we were fortunate enough with coal ash that it did pass both chambers and the governor did sign it into law. And sometimes the governor will have a big public signing of bills, but that doesn't always happen. It really just depends on the bill and everything else that's going on, right? And for coal ash, you know, unfortunately, we're not quite done. We have to go through what we call the rulemaking process. So what we have also learned as community members is that one thing is to draft up a bill and get support for it. Another thing is going through all of this and getting it voted on. And then finally, you have the implementation, which sometimes feels a little harder than everything else I just explained, believe it or not. And for us, we really are reliant on the Illinois EPA to make sure that this law goes into effect, and the Illinois EPA is looking at the rules and the regulations to make sure that it's the best for our community. And unfortunately, we've been stalled. This legislation passed in 2019, and we had very detailed things on there of how to get a draft rulemaking and a timeline, because we knew that sometimes government doesn't work as fast as we would like it to. And we are stuck on the final rule at the moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a next slide. But regardless of everything that's going on, we've been working at this since 2013 and it hasn't been easy. And I say that because we have had some legal victories. And as I said, we had to learn, right, how to navigate lawsuits and doing things for our community. So since 2013, Sierra Club, Prairie Rivers Network, and a lot of other organizations put in different lawsuits based off of what we felt NRG was liable for and what laws they were breaking. And we finally, one of those lawsuits finally gave us some good news in 2019 for the Illinois Pollution Board ruled that Waukegan's lakefront polluted groundwater with coal ash, right? So you see this, we have the east ash pond and the west ash pond, but then that circle right there, that is former coal ash, right? So we have coal ash that's storing there that's not wet, but it's already green over. Like if you went there and looked at it, it would just be green, right? So, but it's underneath. So, unfortunately for us, this just has meant that we have to continue working every angle until we successfully remove this coal ash from the lakefront. And we're currently working on additional legislation because while we were able to pass SB 9, the bill in 2019, we need something that takes more action and that clarifies that this is the most dangerous coal ash that we have here and that we need it removed because what NRG is trying to do is they've put in a permit requesting to remove one of the coal ash ponds, but leave the other one, which makes no sense to us. Why are you going to remove one and keep one there? This is right next to Lake Michigan, as you can see in this image, and Lake Michigan provides the water for over 6.5 million Illinois residents who drink Lake Michigan water every day. So we're working on legislation to ensure that there's an equitable implementation on the Coal Ash Pollution Prevention Act that we passed in 2019 and make sure NRG is complying with the legislation in Waukegan and that it can't continue spreading the lies that it's been spreading in Springfield with its lobbyists. And we, thought that there was a victory in 2019, and there was, but we just are going to continue to be vigilant until we know this is taken care of. The Illinois Environmental Law and Policy Center came out with a report a couple months ago, basically talking about how water, and how things are moving and shifting up and how Lake Michigan is going to be overrun this whole area, which would be devastating to our water source, right? So we're going to continue working and just want to, it's not easy. And I encourage you all, and I know a lot of you guys are involved with other state legislation, and I know a lot of you guys have supported us when we were doing SB 9 and continue to support us and just follow us on social media and reach out to me, and I'm happy to tell you where we are when it comes to this very specific with coal ash or anything else that CPLC is doing, or mano, we have a lot of legislation we're working on as well to make sure that
that's
Illinois is a welcoming
wonderful.
state.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Celeste. There we go. We really appreciate it. And we will have the questions afterwards. Just you can tell the amount of work that Celeste and her group has done on these environmental causes for Lake County, and she's so well thought of. So I'm going to spotlight Hannah now, and Celeste, thank you. We'll have questions later. People can put your questions in the box to the questioners. So that will be Nancy and Bonnie. And here's Mr. Conneen. I'll put you two together. So I'm happy. Should I spotlight myself for a minute? I guess I will. I am very happy to introduce Mr. Andrew Conneen and his student Hannah Yu. And Hannah, you will laugh because I was teaching at Stevenson High School when Mr. Conneen came for his first year. So I remember when we both looked a lot younger, and Andrew Conneen has really gained some renown in the area in civics. He's quite a pioneer, and He not only is a teacher in the classroom, but he is the sponsor of the Political Action Club, and you can talk about some of their activities. And you all know a law that now exists that started with the Stevenson students, and he will tell you about that. And then Hannah, I wasn't sure, is the one about the college students being judges, is that enacted into law now? Or is it
No,
still a bill?
so
It's still a bill. Okay. So
yeah.
Hannah will tell you about two bills. One has to do with allowing Illinois public colleges and universities, it allows them to give academic credit to their college students who serve as election judges. So that's a wonderful idea. And your other bill, you might have to explain to people a little bit about microfibers, is to require that washing machines that are manufactured or sold, new ones, in the state of Illinois, have a microfiber filter, because they are discovering that all these fleece garments that everybody loves, the little tiny polyester fibers get into the waterways. They are too tiny to be stopped by the traditional water treatment plants. And there could be a fiber filter on your washing machines. So you'll tell us about that. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. I think you can go back and forth and maybe start with Mr. Conneen, because his is passed, and then Hannah can tell us, how did you write that bill? How did you know what to write? Go ahead, Mr.
Well, thank you so much. And like Rosemary said, I am a teacher at Stevenson. I've been there for 25 years. And Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm one of Mr. Conneen's students. I'm a high school senior, and I go to Stevenson. Yeah, so I've been involved with two bills introduced by Rep. Didich to the Illinois House.
Right. So the great thing about Stevenson specifically, Stevenson's a huge high school, more than 4,000 students in Southern Lake County. We have 17 different communities. And ever since I got there 25 years ago, there's always been tremendous support in the community from parents, from administrators, of trying to get our students to be engaged in community events. And so I didn't start the Political Action Club. The Political Action Club started before me. There has always been, kind of in the DNA of Stevenson, and maybe it's because of our political namesake of Adlai Stevenson, kind of a commitment by the school of wanting our students to not just learn civics, but to do civics outside the classroom. And so with that, part of my story, and this I'm going to turn over quickly to Hannah, is the idea of just connecting students with incredible opportunities, with local grassroots activism, as Celeste was talking about, with competitive campaigns, whether it be for U.S. House, for county board, trying to find competitive elections to get students involved, to kind of make local campaigns aware that students can be wonderful volunteers, of the job skills and the communication skills and the engagement skills that campaign work and advocacy work can give for a 15, a 16-year-old, even someone who's too young to vote or maybe not eligible to vote. And so one of the incredible opportunities that we've had at Stevenson was we've gone to, and Hannah was one of these trips. In fact, 3 years ago, we go to Iowa for the Iowa caucus. And we take students in buses over to Iowa to see some of the rallies for both sides. And in fact, 3 times we've taken students to an actual caucus night. And so the story of Suffrage at 17 actually started on caucus night in Iowa, of all places, Davenport, Iowa. I can tell you, the Davenport High School gym, where our students, we had 40 students who were caucus observers. That was the night of John Kerry and Howard Dean. In fact, you might remember the Howard Dean scream that happened later that night. That was kind of the first viral moment, right? Well, that night we were in the Davenport High School gym, And Stevenson students started interacting with a lot of high school students from Davenport. And a number of these students in Davenport were 17 years old, but they were participating in the caucus. And so that's the first time that students and I kind of learned that a number of different states had state laws that allowed for 17-year-olds to participate in a caucus or vote in a primary at the age of 17 if they're going to be eligible to vote in the general election later in November. And so I remember on the bus ride home, kids were buzzing about how cool it was that, you know, high school seniors could participate in this Iowa caucus that night throughout the state of Iowa. And, you know, the conversation gets into, as your theme says today, advocacy at home, that the advocacy started on that bus ride of wondering, well, what would be the process that Celeste was just talking about? What's the process of turning this idea that we see in a neighboring state of becoming possibly a law in the state of Illinois? So that's the short story of how it started. It's a long story, and there were a number of failures. And one, you know, just talking about this idea when different state reps would come to the building, there was a lot of, you know, polite, yeah, maybe we'll think about it. 2009, Representative Kathy Rigg, she liked the idea, and she decided to work with some students to get her staff to draft the idea into legislation. And we took students down to Springfield in 2009 to testify, and we quickly learned that this is complicated. This is not as easy as Celeste was talking about, as the cartoon that I still show in class of how a bill becomes a law. And even though it might seem common sense to, you know, a high school teacher and some high school students, it's not always common sense, and it takes a lot of work to turn these ideas into legislation, because it's important. And one of the first questions of the suffrage at 17 was, can we do this? Does the Illinois Constitution allow for 17-year-olds to vote in a primary election? And there were some significant questions, constitutional questions and legal questions about this. And I'm not going to lie, we were really discouraged in 2009 because we thought the answer was no. We thought there was enough skepticism about the legalities of it that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And out of the blue, I still have the fax. Someone faxed me from Speaker Madigan's council office. Someone had heard about our work, the students' work with Representative Rigg, and kind of did his own research into the constitutionality of, would you lower the voting age in a primary election in the Democratic and Republican primaries? And it was about a 10-page legal brief document where this counsel in Speaker Madigan's office said, yeah, looking back at the Constitutional Convention in Illinois back in the early 1970s, in the discussions that were going on there, and how the law was written, and kind of how similar Illinois' voting law is with other states that at that time had suffrage at 17 laws. His conclusion was, this is legal. And so we were able to use that with momentum, and particularly a new governor helped in 2014, a new governor who, you know, had kind of tried to spotlight different areas of political reform in the state of Illinois. At that time, we had Representative Carol Senti, who started the process again for the students. And like Celeste said, going down the testifying committee. And in 2014, there was a different momentum, much more, and again, the legal questions we had kind of been set aside for a lot of lawmakers who initially were skeptical. The students did an incredible job of using social media in 2000, and this was going 2013, and use social media to build coalitions across the state with different high schools. The students did an incredible job of getting a lot of different bipartisan support. Representative Sullivan was a terrific bipartisan supporter. So we kind of planted those seeds and learned some coalition building on the fly. And again, the importance of testifying in committee was really important. You know, there was some skepticism, particularly from Republicans, who thought that suffrage at 17 was a way to indoctrinate students to vote more Democratic. And we had to use examples from other states. That it was actually states like Indiana and Kentucky that were actually the first suffrage at 17 states. And so it was actually in the Midwest, you know, the idea of suffrage at 17 actually started in Midwestern states, in Indiana, particularly, to kind of quell some of those concerns. So it's terrific to see students being able to testify, present those details, do the research to model that. The wonderful thing, besides getting that law into place, and I'll share my screen of having the governor Quinn come to Stevenson to sign the bill. Sorry, you don't need to see my messy desktop. There it is. Let's go there. Yeah. And so Governor Quinn came to Stevenson on our football field during summer school and signed the legislation, the law, that it really did plant seeds where I still have students and parents who will talk about this now 10 years later. And Hannah becomes a really important part of the story because, like I said, getting students engaged in community events is what we do at Stevenson. We really feel like it's the really the mandate of what public schools in the United States should be doing. And we're founded on the ideal of creating an educated citizenry, and not just educated, but also comfortable with the idea of advocating for themselves in the classroom. Increasingly, we talk about advocating for their physical health, advocating for their mental health as signs of engaged advocacy and you know, the grassroots, the basics of engaged citizenship. So when Hannah came to me last semester and told me that, oh yeah, I was doing work and I got my own bill drafted. And it was awesome because I had no idea. It's not like it was something I was telling Hannah, hey, you should really think about this. But based on Hannah's involvement in the Political Action Club and just her personal interest in getting involved, she connected with Representative Didich through an internship. She can tell you the story. And it really becomes the ripple effects of what we call action civics or engaged civics. The idea that, you know, teachers and schools can provide some organization, provide teachers and sponsors can provide some inspiration to students. Hey, here's how you can get connected. But after that point, students kind of take it on their own. And, you know, the goal is become lifelong engaged citizens. Hannah happened to start that at the age of 16.
Yeah.
And so her story becomes an awesome continuation of that work. So I'm going to turn over to Hannah.
Well, yeah, so I became an election judge for the first time in the November 2020 election, which was like 5 days after my 16th birthday. And that was a crazy experience because it was a COVID year. And it was also my first time being an election judge. I'd never done it before. I didn't really know very many people who were doing it, but Mr. Conneen hosted a training at our school gym. So I was just like, why not? So then I did that. And then the next year I became an intern for Rep Didich, who is my state rep. I think he's also an alum of Stevenson, which is like my high school. But yeah, so he has a lot of high school interns who help him do bills and like do research for various ideas that they themselves have. And so I connected with him and his like staff. So that's Whitney and Fabi, who work in his office. And then the next year after that, which was last summer, I voted for the first time because of suffrage at 17, in the primary, which is in July. It was pushed back. And I was also an election judge in that election. Yeah, so I voted early, and then the day of the election, I was an election judge at a middle school in Deerfield. And then after that, I started reading the news and like reading various like articles that were kind of coming out locally, basically saying that a lot of counties were having trouble staffing their elections because there was COVID, and then there was also like some increased like hostility towards election administration overall. And then a lot of election judges tend to be older. And so there was a study, I think, that came out from the Brennan Center that said that like around a quarter of election staff were planning to leave before 2024. So I started thinking about like basically what can be done about this. And I thought about my own experiences. I'd been an election judge twice at this point. I was 17, so I was still very, very young. So I did some research into what other states were planning on doing. And I came across one bill that was recently passed in New Jersey that basically allows public universities to give one like elective credit to students who participate in an election as a judge, and universities would have to submit a plan to the state about what they were planning on doing. So it was still up to the university whether or not they wanted to adopt that policy, but yeah, so that bill passed it was almost unanimous in the Senate, and it passed by a large margin in the House too of New Jersey. And so I reached out to the staff at Rep. Dittage's office, and I asked them like what they thought about it, and they thought it was a good idea. And I also talked to, I think he was a candidate at the time, Anthony Vega, who's our county clerk now. He was running against the old one, I forgot her name. But I talked to him when he came to our school at the, we had a candidates fair where all of like the local candidates came and talked to students about their platforms. And so I talked to him about this idea, and I think he also supported it at the time. And so, yeah, the legislation was drafted, basically modeled after the language in the New Jersey bill. And I had a lot of help from Whitney Richardson, who's the legislative director at Rep. Dittage's office. And it was recently introduced this past January after the new like representatives and senators were all inaugurated. And right now I think it has like 6 or 7 co-sponsors. And it has been put on the Ethics and Elections Committee. And yeah, so it's HB 0995. And you can find that in ILGA, in the Illinois General Assembly website. So that's the story of that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is just so impressive. I would have died to go to Iowa as a teenager, and I can't believe that it's so wonderful what you've done and accomplished. So thank you. We'll ask you to stay and take some questions afterwards, but we want to go to Elaine Nekritz now, and let me get her on the screen here, and I'll introduce her. So Elaine Nekritz served in the Illinois House of Representatives from January 2003 through October of 2017, representing a district in North and Northwest suburban Cook County. During her tenure, she chaired numerous committees, including Judiciary, Civil Law, Personnel and Pensions, and Elections and Campaign Reform. She served as Assistant Majority Leader for over 6 years. Through service in the House, Elaine has relationships with members in both chambers and on both sides of the aisle. She is respected by Democrats and Republicans in both House and Senate. Elaine is currently a principal with Nekritz Amador Andersson Group, LLC. And we had Steve Andersson on our list, but Elaine will tell you there was an emergency and he was unable to come, but we're so happy that Elaine is here representing the firm. The firm, formed in 2017, provides personalized and professional lobbying and consulting services for clients whose mission includes a public benefit. Clients include United Way of Illinois, Metropolitan Planning Council, Illinois Housing Council, and Illinois Justice Project. Elaine earned her law degree from the University of Michigan, and we are happy to welcome you here today. Thank you for giving us up your time.
Thanks, Rosemary, and many thanks to the League for including me. It's a delight to be on a panel with someone I respect as much as Celeste. And it was fun to hear her bio and all those awards that she's gotten. We worked closely together on passing the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act in 2021. And I credit Celeste with bringing a lot of those votes across the finish line for that. And Andrew and Hannah, it's nice to meet you. Kathy Rigg is one of my closest friends. And so I always am happy to hear her name. So I don't want to, I think I'm sort of the wrap up of like, well, what happens on the inside? How do things really happen in the Illinois General Assembly, and how do they pass? And I think you've heard those stories. I mean, the stories that from Celeste and Andrew and Hannah are all very accurate ways that a bill gets passed. And frankly, whether it's a lobbyist, a legislator, or of advocates like those three individuals, everyone uses the same tools to get a bill passed. It's learning the process, understanding the process, but most importantly, persistence, persuasion, and hard work. There's just nothing that replaces those things. And so, there are lots of questions that folks like me as a lobbyist ask, that advocates like Hannah and Andrew and Celeste learn of, like, who supports the bill. Do we have a coalition, whether it's a big statewide coalition or a smaller coalition that supports the bill? And how do we build that coalition? How do we build that level of support? Or as the students from Stevenson did, hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to go present it to a legislator and see what happens and carry it across the finish line. And maybe the idea alone will be enough to get the bill passed. Another important question that I ask is, well, who's opposed and how influential are they? Do we have organized labor opposed to us, because they are a very influential group in the Illinois General Assembly? Are we going to raise some opposition from interest groups like, the State Medical Society or the Retail Merchants Association? What does the public think of this idea? I think, the work on the coal ash bill of getting rid of some really nasty pollution that's right next to Lake Michigan would gain a lot of popular support. And then the work is, how do you translate that popular support into votes in the General Assembly? And some of that obviously depends on what's the makeup of the General Assembly and how does that affect your prospects. So there isn't just the partisan breakdown. There's the geographic breakdowns of the city of Chicago versus suburbanites and downstate legislators, all of whom have different, who may be either Republicans or Democrats, but may not necessarily identify all a lot of the environmental issues don't necessarily break down on partisan lines, because you can have legislative members from the city of Chicago who we all think of as progressive, but actually some of them are pretty moderate Democrats and might even lean toward the conservative side. So there are those different kinds of breakdowns of the makeup of the General Assembly that can really significantly impact whether a piece of legislation passes. So I think one of the things that I wanted to focus on is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I cared a lot about when I was in the General Assembly, of what is the process? How does it work? And how well does it work? There are written rules that guide how the General Assembly works, but there's also a lot of it that's guided by custom. And both are very critically important to actually getting a bill passed, and understanding both. It can be very Byzantine and complicated, and in some ways unnecessarily challenging to navigate, but they are very critical pieces of getting a bill passed. But they're also important for the work of the General Assembly because they do provide checks and balances. Believe it or not, the rules do preserve in many ways the rights of the minority vis-a-vis the majority, and create a process that is uniform and that you can understand, and also constitutional. And the Constitution really does matter, as Andrew Conneen said, as to whether or not a bill can pass and how it passes. And then lastly, like any large organization, the General Assembly reflects its leaders. So and less so the governor, but more the legislative leaders, the Senate president and the speaker, and their personalities and their priorities are imbued throughout the legislative bodies. Because they make a lot of decisions about how things go, and they have a lot of leeway as to how things go. And so, like any large organization, a corporation, or any business, that their personal leadership styles really do matter in how things get done. I will say that every it isn't just the Illinois General Assembly that's complicated and difficult to maneuver through. I have to say that I don't understand the rules in Congress at all, despite having been in government, in Illinois state government, for over 20 years. And if I had to go to Congress to try to pass a bill, I would have to do exactly what Celeste did, which is start from scratch, figure it all out, understand how it works and what the rules are, and the timelines and all that, because it's just very different. And that's the same is true with every legislature. They just, again, different rules and different timelines for how things happen. So I know that being a lobbyist has a worse connotation maybe than even being a politician, but I would just like to defend my profession. It is everyone's First Amendment right to seek redress from their government, and lobbyists, that is what lobbyists do. And I think what we bring to the process is an understanding of all those nuances that I just talked about. What are the rules? What are the customs? How do you cut through a lot of the confusion in order to get things passed? And so just a couple of examples. Folks talked about the choice of a sponsor. It's in some ways it comes down, doesn't have to, but it can come down to a popularity contest. Is your sponsor well liked? Will we lose votes because of our choice of a sponsor? And that's something that, working in the General Assembly every day, I have a sense of that. And an advocate coming in for the first time will not. As far as the timeline goes, every bill in the House and Senate, and this is by custom, not by rule, goes through a leadership process to figure out, just to kind of educate leadership on what the bill does, but then also where is that bill going to go? What committee does that bill get assigned to for its hearing? And understanding that timeline and how that process works can guide how long when you should introduce a bill, and then how do you influence which committee the bill might get assigned to. And lastly, I'll just say I know that sort of lobbyists are perceived as folks that take legislators out to dinner, and because of those perks, we get things done. And I would almost reverse that and say that dinner is as important for me to understand who that legislator is, what are their priorities, and how can they be persuaded, and what is their life experience that leads them to be serving in the General Assembly and doing the work that they're doing. So that all that leads to being successful in passing bills and getting things done. Whether you agree with the bills or not, that's up to all of us as advocates, and the league plays a big role in weighing in and lending their voice to what legislation passes. So I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'll just stop there, and hopefully we can take some questions.
Oh, I think so. The luxury of going last is that we don't have to get out of the way for anybody else. So I think we have a little bit of time if people have some questions. So thank you very much. I'll still call you Representative Nekritz because that's how I always think of you. And we have two question askers, Nancy Goldberg and Bonnie McNeil. And I'll start with Bonnie. Have you gotten any questions in your mailbox that you can ask of the panel?
I haven't, but I'm hoping maybe now that the presentations are done, maybe people will,
Okay.
maybe Nancy has.
How about Nancy? Any questions?
Not yet. Also hoping that now we're at the end, people will ask.
Well, yeah, we're not doing raised hands. We're doing the chat box for this.
Bonnie, you want to take this one?
I didn't get
You
one.
don't see it? Okay, I have one. May I?
Sure. Go right
How
ahead.
do lobby days affect elected representative? It's blocked here. Representatives, any specific examples?
It sounds like a Nekritz question.
It does sound like a Nekritz question. Although Celeste, I think, has participated in quite a number of lobby days as well. So maybe Celeste can have some perspective on that. Lobby days, I think, are very helpful for getting constituents in front of legislators, and and with a large turnout, it's really obvious that a group is there, especially with the brightly colored shirts that Celeste showed in her picture. And legislators do get to know, like, especially when groups come down year after year, like, oh, it's the purple shirt day. Oh, it's the green shirt day. And so I do think that it's a significant presence in the Capitol that's noticed and demonstrates significant support. So I think they're very valuable.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick, depending on the group too, sometimes they'll like bring things for people. And legislators are just like every other day people, right? If their colleague is getting a candy bar that says you're a champion, people are like, oh, who got you that, right? Like, so sometimes it does help when people are unsure if they want to make that full commitment publicly before the vote, right? Because maybe they're being lobbied by the opposition of that bill. It can help gain that support of like, oh, all these other people are voting for this bill. They're all getting pictures with these people. Like, I want to be in that picture too. So it can help when the legislators are willing to be lobbied, right? If they've already made up their mind, or if public pressure doesn't affect them, you're not going to move them regardless of how many people you bring.
Okay, and Bonnie, there's one that was sent to everyone. Do you see that there?
I have one that came from Mr. McGrath. Jim McGrath asked, who can actually write the bill? Does the legislator, or do you have to have an attorney?
I was wondering that
Hannah?
about Hannah. How did you do that, Hannah?
Yeah, so I didn't write the text that's currently being debated in committee. So I sent over a draft to Rep. Didich's staff, and then they edited it, and then it was submitted to the LRB, I think, the Legislative Reference Bureau. And so they do the final edits on that, and then that gets filed after inauguration.
Did you have a guideline or a template or something to start you though?
Yeah, so I just went off of New Jersey's, they had a bill that was already passed, and I just used that language.
Okay.
And I got to tell you how proud I am when you're explaining that, and then I'm watching Representative Nekritz nod that this young lady knows the process already at 17 years old.
I'm
So
not an
cool.
expert.
It's so
I've
cool as your
learned a
teacher
lot.
to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jim, you do not need an attorney, and legislators can actually just submit ideas to the Legislative Reference Bureau, to LRB. People like me have to do a little better than that and submit language, but it doesn't have to be drafted by an attorney. The folks at the Legislative Reference Bureau are all attorneys, and so they're the ones that make it legalese and also put it into the form where it can be introduced in the House and the Senate.
Is it the legislator that submits it to the bureau, or Is it an individual can do it, or how does that work?
You have to have a legislator's name associated with it in order to be able to submit it. They won't take it unless you have a legislator's name on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Nancy, do you have another one? Oh, I don't hear.
Yeah, if I can just add on to Jim and Representative Nekritz and Celeste, if you could. One of my experiences was when we first started doing this, how early in the legislative term that starts with the drafting, that in many cases, if citizens are reaching out to a state rep with a really solid idea, maybe from a different state, like Hannah's talking about, that process in many cases starts right at the beginning of a legislative session. So that a lot of state reps like to have those bills drafted so they can be introduced in the very first weeks, because that legislative session, it goes very, very quickly. And to get through the committee process, it really helps to have those bills drafted early.
Oh, sorry, I did have one more question if I could, just to Representative Elaine, how effective do you think witness slips are?
So when I first started in the General Assembly, before there were electronic witness slips, it was like someone had to walk into the committee hearing room, fill out the slip, and hand it to the committee clerk for the chair to read the list. So it was really sort of a process for legislators to know, like, the interest groups that were interested in the legislation, either for or against. Now that it's opened up, which I think is great, don't get me wrong, I think that it's super, but it becomes just a numbers game. Like, oh, there's 1,176 for and 766 against, and that doesn't tell me as a member of the committee who are all those people? Why do they care? And what, are they represented by a coalition or anything like that? I think the Senate has changed their rules this year so that there will be some of both. There will be like the opportunity for the public to weigh in and engage in just piling on numbers, but also having a process in the Capitol for folks, like for the interest groups, to weigh in so that you can tell, am I more aligned as a legislator sitting on this committee with the Illinois Environmental Council or with the Illinois Manufacturers Association? Having that information is always kind of helpful in deciding on legislation.
Thank you. There was one that I saw. Nancy, did you get that question that I forwarded?
Just muted.
You're muted, Nancy.
Why did I do that? From Abigail Nichols, would Elaine Nekritz talk about the issue of party discipline?
Or not?
Yeah, it matters a lot more when the majorities are smaller. Right now, in the Illinois House, out of the 118 members, 78 are Democrats, and you need 60 to pass a bill. So you could lose 18 Democrats and still pass a bill. So it's just party discipline means a lot less. When you got 62 Democrats and you need 60 to pass a bill, party discipline can matter a lot more. I have to say, in my years there, and I served only under Speaker Madigan, and I know he was like allegedly notorious for party discipline. He asked me for a vote once on the floor in my 15 years there. So it was, you kind of knew when you had to be on the team, like passing a budget, got to be on the team. Other bills didn't have, maybe you didn't have to be on the team, maybe it didn't fit your district, whatever. So I just think that legislators have a lot more autonomy sometimes than the public thinks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it sounds like, from what Celeste told us, it sounds like it's a big lift, no matter what, to get started, and a lot of stops and starts along the way. And And maybe that's as it should be, because laws shouldn't be that easy to pass. It should be something important that means something to the people. So I want to thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Jean is starting the slide. I'm going to stop the recording